Chapter 10. The Weight of Broken Things. The truck's engine growled, a low thrum against the valley's oppressive silence. Spark eased them forward, paws tight on the wheel, a ferryman guiding a cargo of purpose-built monsters toward dimly flickering lights in a fogged-up sedan. It wasn't a cascade. It was an eruption. A flood of chitin burst from the fueling station's canopy, scuttling down support pillars in a coordinated, unnatural descent. Eve's rifle snapped up before the first burrower hit tarmac. A silent beam of coherent light cored the skittering shape, its carapace flash boiling into a foul vapor. Two more followed it into silent, efficient oblivion. But there were always more. "Glory!" The word was a blast of torn metal from Tarkin's throat. He hit the ground before the truck stopped, a crashing wave of green scales and heavy plate. He charged past Morral without a second glance, a spear-headed battering ram aimed at the heart of the swarm. The older, meaner Vesk's pike was a whirlwind of impaling strikes that carved a path deep into the tide before it closed over him, swallowing his bellowing challenges. At the truck, Morral met the wave that Tarkin had split. His pike blurred, impaling one attacker and sweeping two more from their feet as the swarm's charge broke against him like chitin on rock. The sheer weight of bodies washed over him, burying him for a moment before he erupted from the mass, staggering back, his pike scything wildly. A mantid horror was already on him, scaling his chest plate, its mandibles digging, scraping for purchase between the seams of his armor. The swarm tide was also boiling toward Eve. The chittering wasn't just sound. It was a data-streamed assault, worming directly into her auditory sensors. Her limbs locked. Targeting solutions vanished, replaced by cascades of red text errors. Sanitize infestation versus protect guest asset. The logic knot paralyzed her, trapping the android in the screaming silence of her own code. From the cab, the percussive blasts of rifles hammered the tight space. An eight-legged hunter clawed at Jaren's open window until a point-blank shot painted the glass in a spray of black viscera. Morale, ever the bulwark, slammed his armored shoulder into his kin, forcing him back from the brink of being overwhelmed. A chitinous claw snagged deep in Targan's shoulder plate, but Morale's shove broke the hold. They fell into a defensive stance, pikes sweeping, and fought back to back, a vortex of brutal, methodical violence. Fire from the cab tore through the swarm's thinning ranks until they finally broke through. Moreau hooked a claw under Eve's arm, the brutal physical jolt shattering her logic lock. Her systems rebooted to the sight of cooling rifle barrels and the wet twitching of dismembered limbs. The sedan's doors burst open. A man with a wild beard and wilder eyes tumbled out, scrambling backward on the ice. A woman followed, her face a bloodless mask, pulling a young girl no older than 10 behind her. "Hours! We've been trapped for hours," the man babbled, crawling toward the truck. They scrambled for the cab. Jaren reached down, his hand surprisingly steady as he lifted the girl inside, then her mother. The girl's eyes found the two Vesk clambering back onto the flatbed, silhouettes of scaled muscle and scarred armor. "You're like the Holo Heroes," she breathed. A low rumble started in Moral's chest. He straightened, puffing out his plates, his scarred face splitting in a grin of childish pride. He turned to the others. "Did you hear?" he boomed. "A hero!" Targan just grunted, wiping a smear of foul effluvia from a fresh gouge in his armor. Eve, systems fully restored, tilted her head. Heroism is a social construct that shows a near unity correlation with high-risk, low-survivability actions, a tactically inefficient designation. Moral's grin didn't falter. As Spark eased the truck back onto the road, the rescued man's words came in frantic bursts. "Linmar, the factory, Cooper. She wouldn't let us leave." "Hoarded all the fuel, said corporate evac was coming." "Is it really the swarm?" the woman interrupted, her voice a tremor. "Not just scouts?" Sparks' gaze met hers in the rearview mirror, his expression hard. "They're everywhere," he said. "Only Rios is safe." "We owe you," the man whispered, staring back at the dark shape of the fueling station. The little girl pressed her face to the rear window, her small hand tentatively raised in a wave at Morrel while hugging the oversized longship agriculture jacket around her frail frame. Spark caught the gesture in the rearview mirror. "He knows," he said to the girl, his voice low and gentle. "Heroes like him, they're best seen from a distance." No one asked the family their names. Anonymity was a shield against a loss that felt all but certain. The truck rumbled on, a pocket of fragile life in a dead world. Inside, the family huddled together, the initial shock giving way to a numb silence. The girl kept her face pressed to the glass, her small freckled features pale and sullen as she worried her lower lip, her eyes listlessly tracking the ruined landscape as it slid by. An hour later they reached a bridge spanning a black, frozen river, leading to a sprawling waterworks complex. A figure in a tattered SDF uniform burst from the shadows of a pump house. Skeletal and smeared with grime, he waved a laser pistol wildly. The family screamed, the woman pulling the girl into a fierce, protective embrace. Eve's reaction was instantaneous. Her rifle was on the truck's roof, the man perfectly centered in her sights. A logical solution. Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Hold fire!" Jaren's voice was a sharp crack of command. "SDF, stand down!" The soldier's wild eyes darted from the truck to the deeper shadows beneath the bridge, as if watching a battle only he could see. He scrambled behind a makeshift barricade of rusted barrels, his voice rising to a shriek. "What are you waiting for? They're running over us. Drive them back to the river." Spark slowed, sticking his head out the window. "What's going on, trooper?" The man's eyes locked onto him. A wordless sound of horror tore from his throat as he pointed a trembling finger. "It's in the truck! With you!" He fired. A woman screamed from inside the cab, the sound lost in the violent crack of the laser blast, searing the air an inch from Spark's head. The Asoki shrieked, a raw sound of terror, yanking his head back inside as he stomped on the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on the icy bridge. As they sped past, Jaren's vision fractured. For a heartbeat, he saw through the soldier's eyes, scrambling shadows swarming the girders, stridulating whispers echoing from the frozen river below. The world was a cacophony of phantom limbs and gnawing mandibles. Then it was gone, leaving only the ghost of a scream etched into his mind. He watched the soldier stagger away toward the factory, a lone figure swallowed by the concrete and steel. "Spirits take him," Jaren muttered. The father flinched as the truck's shadow shifted, his gaze darting to the bruised sky. "Half an hour," he stammered, "of light." The agricultural center emerged from the gloom, an island of harsh light in the twilight. A large headquarters building, emblazoned with the Longship Agricultural Alliance logo, dominated a plaza. In its center, a crowd of about 30 people huddled, their attention fixed on a woman on the steps. She was gaunt, her dark gray business suit hanging off her frame. 2 men with corporate-issue carbines flanked her. As the truck rumbled into the plaza, one of the guards fired a shot into the air, the crack echoing off the buildings. The woman, Rita Cooper, didn't flinch. Her voice, amplified by a small speaker on her lapel, was smooth and practiced. That broadcast from the governor was an act of desperation, a panic signal. Longship's assets are valuable. We have been assured that a dedicated corporate extraction is on its way. Stay calm. Stay here. Stay safe. "Safe?" he said. "Get to Rios," a man in the crowd yelled, his voice cracking. Jaren leaned across Spark and slammed his palm on the truck's horn, a long, angry blast that cut through Cooper's placating drone. He stuck his head out the window. "The road to Rios is open. The only thing keeping you here is her." Cooper's professional mask cracked. A flash of pure fury twisted her features before she smoothed it away, turned without a word, and disappeared inside the HQ. The 2 guards remained, their expressions settling into a sullen kind of boredom. The squad dismounted, the rescued family scrambling to stay behind the Vesk. A farmer in grease-stained overalls rushed forward. "The vehicle batteries, the fuel cells. She's got it all locked in the warehouse. Says it's reserved for the corporate evac." Morale needed no other prompting. He began a steady, heavy-footed advance toward the HQ door, his pike held loosely at his side. One of the guards shifted to block his path. He didn't raise his rifle. Just a hand. "That's company property, friend." "Batteries." Morale growled, the word a low vibration in his chest. The guard looked the Vesk up and down, a smirk twisting his lips. So, what do we call that? Sir? Ma'am? Does it even matter? You wait. Here. Understand? No, wander off. No, eat the furniture. Before Morale could react, Jaren stepped smoothly between them, his voice calm and even. He's with me. Why don't we talk, human to human? The guard's eyes flicked to Jaren's SDF insignia, then back to his face. He sighed, a put-upon sound. Fine. Look, my contract is with Longship, not with her. It's got a week left. I get my full commission if I complete the contract. You want to void my hazard pay because she's having a power trip? What if, Sparks' voice piped up from behind Moreau's armored leg, you were to be overwhelmed? A convincing but non-lethal altercation? You wouldn't be in breach? Targan let out a harsh, rasping sound that might have been a laugh. Enough of this monkey chatter, he sneered, his gaze flicking between Jaren and the guards. Why doesn't our chrome doll service these men while they rut and posture? Morale and I will have a more direct conversation with the female inside. Our methods are much more persuasive. Outwardly, Eve remained a still form of alloy and composite armor, but inside her core, the Vesk's words were a shard of malicious code. They bypassed firewalls and struck the ghost of her former self, the phantom circuits of the companion android she once was. Dormant, ripped-out subroutines screamed into life, flooding her with echoes of protocols and organs she no longer possessed. It crescended into a grinding, static-filled shriek, the unique agony of a nascent soul being forcibly reminded that to the world she was still just mindless piece of scrap. The ghost in her machine clawed against the cold logic, not just in confusion, but in a new, terrifying sensation that bordered on rage. The conflict was paralyzing, 1,000 fragmented directives for comfort against the single, unifying imperative to kill. Moreau's rumble deepened into something nastier. He leaned forward, his shadow swallowing the guard, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are in the way of the door. You look soft. I wonder what noise you will make when I walk through you. A pop? Or a squish? The guard's professional calm finally evaporated. He swallowed hard. You're SDF. You can't just... SDF is gone, Tarkin said, his voice flat. He stepped up beside Morale, a mirror image of green-scaled menace. He patted the haft of his own pike. Out here, we're just the ones with bigger sticks. His eyes scanned the building behind them, as if they were already ghosts. Corporate policy, he said, his voice a low rasp. When a post is compromised, you liquidate the assets and erase the witnesses. He tapped his pike on the concrete floor. The sound was like a hammer striking stone. Your badges mean nothing. Your signal repeaters are dead. No one is coming. The only thing left to decide is who has to clean up the mess you're about to make on the floor. The guards exchanged a look. Slowly, deliberately, they lowered their carbines and stepped aside. Morale shoved Jaren's restraining hand away, without looking, and marched to the door. It was locked, a digital keypad glowing red. With a frustrated snort, he began mashing the buttons at random. Sparks scurried past him. Allow the professional. He pulled a thin, writhing wire from a port behind his ear and plugged it into a maintenance jack below the keypad. His body locked rigid, his eyes rolled back, and a line of drool trickled from the corner of his mouth. A moment later, he convulsed, unplugged the wire, and blinked. Code is 1138. Amateurs. The lock clicked open. Moreau shouldered the door inward, bursting into a silent reception area. The only light spilled from an adjacent office, the eerie blue-white glow of a dozen security monitors cycling through empty rooms. He swept the space, weapon ready, finding nothing but a kicked-over chair. Then he heard it, a sound from deeper within the complex, a miserable feminine moan that hitched and broke into a wet, rhythmic retching. He moved toward it, his steps deliberate on the sterile floor, hugging the wall of the corridor until he reached a heavy service door marked Agricultural Storage. He kicked it wide. Rita Cooper was on all fours, a thick, viscous drool spilling from her mouth to pool on the floor beneath her. She shuddered, a low whimper escaping her throat. Morale took a cautious step forward just as Jaren and Targan pushed into the room behind him. A choked sound of revulsion escaped Jaren, his hand flying up to cover his mouth as he stumbled back. Targan shoved past them both. "What is it? Is she... Rita's back arched violently, a spasm so powerful it lifted her off her hands. A strangled scream was ripped from her as a torrent of gelatinous effluvium erupted from her mouth, ears, and nose, coalescing on the floor into a single, glistening mass. The biomatter immediately launched itself at Targan, a living tide that climbed his legs with inhuman speed. His cry was cut short as the ooze flowed over his face, a suffocating mask forcing its way into his throat. It didn't just cover him. It sank into his flesh, absorbed in the space of a heartbeat. "Target is lost," Eve reported, her voice utterly calm from the doorway. Targan convulsed, his pike rising, his eyes now vacant glass. He lunged. Morol's training screamed to counter, to drive his own blade through the threat, but his arms wouldn't obey. This was Targan. He managed a clumsy parry, the impact of the pike, a jarring agony up his arm. Targan! The name was a shredded plea, lost in the scrape of metal. The thing wearing his friend's face hissed and scrambled for cover behind a row of shelves. As Eve and Spark laid down suppressive fire, Morol ran, cornering the snarling puppet at the dead end of an aisle. The sound that ripped from Morol's throat wasn't a roar, but a raw bark of grief as he brought his weapon down in a single, precise blow to the head. Targan crumpled. "Target is lost," Eve repeated. "He's not just a target," Jaren snarled at Eve, his voice cracking. "Gods, look, it's coming out!" A torrent of gray-green jelly erupted from Targan's mouth. Hitting the floor, it flowed with desperate speed toward the nearest shelf. Spark was ready. A sustained blast from his laser rifle caught the parasite as it scaled upwards. The thing recoiled, spitting a hiss of vapor that smelled of scorched bile before dropping to the floor. It juddered, boiled, and dissolved into a steaming pile of caustic sludge. In the sudden silence, Spark let out a high-pitched, hysterical giggle. The giggle died. The air was thick with the chemical stench of dissolved parasite. Eve's optical sensors cycled, her combat subroutines disengaging as medical directives took priority. She pivoted, hoisting Rita Cooper's limp body from the floor. A rapid bioscan confirmed Cooper's vitals were more stable than the Vesk's, establishing triage priority. Eve laid the woman on her side, tilting her head back to clear the airway, a textbook recovery position. She was now the second patient in a neat clinical row. Jaren was already kneeling over the Vesk, his hands moving with desperate urgency over the mangled helmet. A low, guttural chant rumbled from his throat. The words, ancient and sharp. A prayer against the tide of dark green seeping from the armor's neck joints. He ripped open a med pack, fingers slick with biliverdin green blood, and fumbled for a trauma patch. He pressed the wide applicator against the worst of the wound, the sealant hissing as it made contact. Beneath his hands, Targan's breathing was a wet, ragged noise. A shudder racked the Vesk's massive frame, but the groan that followed was not one of death. It was a raw, defiant sound. With a surge of brutal strength, Targan lifted his head. He shoved Jaren's hands away with a snarl, planting his own palms on the floor and pushing himself unsteadily to his feet. He gave a violent shake, as if to clear his mind of death itself. Eve produced a med injector and plunged it into Rita's thigh with a sharp hiss. The woman's gasp was a fish's gasp on dry land. A blotchy, unhealthy flush crept back into her cheeks. The two corporate guards hovered at the doorway, their carbines held uselessly, their faces pale. Rita's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "The signal," she rasped, her voice thin and brittle. "It was a song. Told us to wait." Her gaze found the devastation, the steaming sludge on the floor, the hulking form of the wounded Vesk. The corporate certainty in her eyes fractured, replaced by a raw animal fear. He was right. She struggled to push herself up on one elbow. "The keys, the warehouse, it all has to go. Now!" Her eyes settled on the squad, not with authority, but with the desperate plea of the damned. "Everything is yours. Just get us out of here." The air in Cooper's office carried a faint, coppery tang beneath the sterile scent of recycled oxygen. A hint of burnt slime, the building's filtration system struggled to erase. Muted security monitors cast the only light, each screen a silent, monochrome eulogy for the dead facility. Shattered data pads and scattered reports formed drifts against the desk legs, relics of a command structure that no longer existed. The squad's movements settled into rituals of post-combat maintenance. On Cooper's desk, Spark decarbonized his laser rifle with a rag, a nearly ultrasonic whistle tracing the melody of some forgotten show tune. He paused, wiping a smear of black residue from his paw. "Never seen them boil out of that woman's ears like that," he said to the quiet room, the cheer in his voice thin and forced. "Impolite, really." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hiss of cleaning solvent. When it stretched long enough to become a weight, Jaren spoke from the shadows, his voice a low rasp. "Whatever it was, it's gone." He didn't look at the Isoki, his focus still locked on his own immaculate weapon. "Don't think about it." The words, devoid of comfort, but not entirely of pity, hung in the air for a moment before Spark resumed his whistling, the tune now quieter, more brittle. Targan, ignoring the gash that leaked blood from beneath the scaled ridge of his tympanic shield, stitched a lesser gash on his own forearm. The needle, thick as a nail, punched through the tough, scaled skin with a wet tack. He pulled the suture tight with a surgeon's precision, his expression one of detached concentration, not of pain. Each pull of the thread was a methodical act of will. "You enjoy that," Moreau grunted from the floor. His eyes flicked to the sluggishly bleeding gash on Targan's head, the one his own pike had opened, then back to his whetstone. He hadn't stopped sharpening the pike's head since they'd arrived, the rasp of stone on steel, an abrasive counterpoint to Spark's whistling. Targan didn't look up from his sutures. Morale's words drew Eve's focus. Her hand, previously still, began to clench and unclench in a quiet, steady rhythm. "Proper maintenance prevents system failure," she recited, the line pulled from some forgotten technical manual. Targan didn't look up from pulling a suture tight, a cruel smile touching his lips. "And it reminds the body who is in command." The rhythmic clenching of Eve's hand stopped. The contempt in Targan's sneer was a perfect physical echo of the gate. His posture, the angle of his head, the curl of his lip, it was a code injection delivered through body language. Reality stuttered. The Vesk from her memory bled through the present, a data ghost wearing Targan's face. The old words unspooled in her head, not a memory, but a fresh command string burning through her circuits. "Our chrome doll. Service these, men!" A tremor started in her lumbar actuators, a violent shudder she could not suppress. "Error!" her internal sensors screamed. "Subroutine executing. Pallas, Athena, hospitality." A phantom command, dredged from the wreckage of her decommissioned programming, bypassed her authority. She meant to cycle her joints, a standard combat readiness stretch. Instead, an invisible hand seemed to bend her skeleton. Her spine was forced into a languorous arch, a fluid, obscene S-curve optimized to signal discreet invitation in an executive's private chambers. To Eve, it felt like her armor plates were being pried apart. Her pelvis began a slow rotation, a motion that once tested delicate gyroscopic sensors, now grinding against the crude, unsealed actuators. The command was designed to be alluring. The sensation was of being puppeteered by a dead woman. Jaren, lost in the ritual of cleaning his rifle, went still. The movement had caught his eye, an unnerving grace that didn't belong in the sterile, functional motions of the android. It was a dancer's move executed by a killing machine, and it stirred something deep in his gut he thought had been cauterized by grief. A primal, unwanted warmth. It was immediately followed by a cold wave of self-loathing. The memory of his wife, Shaka, her smile, the feel of her hand in his rose like a shield, and this new, base instinct was a smear of filth upon it. Eve's optical sensors rotated, locking onto his eyes. For a heartbeat, he didn't see a machine. He saw a woman, and he was sure, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she had seen the ugliness that had just flickered through him. His gaze was the kill switch. The subroutine crashed with a sharp clack of locking joints. Her posture snapped to a rigid military default, a marionette whose strings had just been cut. A new sensation, An unclassifiable data spike, her diagnostics flagged as system corruption, burned through her circuits like acid. Jaren's attention dropped to his rifle, his focus absolute on a smudge that wasn't there. His hands resumed their work, no longer just cleaning but scouring, the motions short, precise, and violent. The scrape of Moral's whetstone continued its steady rasping. The last, discordant notes of Sparks' tune whistled into the quiet. The sounds were there, but they no longer reached Jaren or Eve. In the space between them, a new, heavier silence had settled. Morol took the first watch, his back to the room. He sat beside Targan's still form, his eyes tracing the lines of the ceremonial armor his kin wore. The carvings told stories of glory. The puncher's splinter plate and ragged tears told the truth. Dried slime clung to the tarnished metal. One pauldron was half sheared away, the steel beneath it blackened. He traced the edge of a deep gouge with a clawed finger. This armor, like his brother's, was just a beautiful lie. Morning was a gray, frozen smear. Targan was already on his feet, moving with the stiff grace of a pained predator. He wore standard-issue combat armor from a corporate depot, its plates emblazoned with the stark logo of the Longship Company, functional, ugly, and intact. As the others loaded the truck, Morale walked back to the office. He didn't look at Targan, who stood watching from the doorway. He lifted the battered plates from the floor. The metal felt heavier than it should, weighted with the failure of false gods and broken promises. He carried the ruined armor to the truck and heaved it onto the flatbed. The crash of steel on the deck was the only sound in the frozen air. He would not leave it behind. Some instinct, deeper than honor, refused to let him.